Hello and welcome everybody to our April 2023 webinar series, Farming with Fungi. This is webinar 3, which is a fungal farming case study with Nicole Masters. All right, so before we get started, and we're having everybody join the webinar today, if you can, in your chat button, which is down in the lower part of your Zoom screen, just go ahead and type in where you're coming from. And I already see a lot of people already know the drill because even before I even mentioned it, people are streaming in about where they're coming from. So
from all over the
all
world.
over. Hey, I like a really, well organized, put together audience here. You guys are already impressing me here. I think there was probably 15 already in there before I even mentioned anything. So good on you guys. Yeah, we're seeing them
Yep.
from all over the world again.
Yep. Manitoba, Vermont, Scotland, Canada,
I'm telling you, one of these days,
Mexico.
somebody's going to troll us on one of these days, Elaine. They're going to put Antarctica because I know that's one of the ones I'm like, all right, that's the missing, link from us here.
None of us, yeah.
But we'll be
But
somebody who's actually from Antarctica. We're like, no, you're not.
but there are nematodes in the soil in
Exactly.
Antarctica. Yeah.
No
I
doubt.
mean,
No doubt.
there's a food web down there, and if they just get enough sunlight, warm enough, we can grow things down there. Little
Exactly.
more
I agree.
global, more climate change, and we can move to Antarctica.
Exactly. Oh, that's not a good thing
I know,
though.
not good.
Okay, so let's talk about our webinar series. So we had webinar 1, which was fungi in the soil food web, which was a fantastic webinar. I highly recommend that you watch the replay, which you can see that the replay is on our YouTube channel. And you can also go to webinar.soilfoodweb.com. And that webinar number 2, which I think Adam did a fantastic job, really kind of get into a lot of philosophy and practical applications around soil biology with a real focus on fungi. So Adam, kudos to you. I think you did a bang up job on webinar 2. And then today is webinar 3, which is fungal farming case with a study with Nicole Masters. And we'll kind of talk about that in just a second. And then we have webinar 4, which is coming up this Saturday. It's going to be at 11 a.m. on April 29th. And this is a great opportunity for folks that are either thinking about becoming consultants, or you have your own farm and want to know kind of what it is to work with consultants. We're going to have people like myself talk about the work that we do and how we got educated through the soil food web, and what it's like to be a consultant, kind of a day in the life kind of thing. So I really hope to see a lot of you folks there on our webinar on Saturday, April 29th. Okay, so let's talk about some of the webinar's rules of engagement, or our kind of guidelines here. Because we have so many folks that join the call, everybody who's not a panelist will be in a muted mode. Just make sure that we have good audio quality for our attendees. And a couple things, we do have a Q&A section at the end of this. So if you can, and you want to post a question for panelists to be able to talk about, on the bottom of your Zoom screen, again, there's a Q&A button, different from the chat section. Go ahead and put your question in the Q&A section, and it will be prompted for us panelists to go ahead and review. And we also still like to have you converse with other attendees, and most of you already are familiar with the chat button because I've seen quite a few folks talk about where they're coming from. If you go into the chat, please have a dialogue amongst the other attendees in the session today. But just recognize, if you do put a question in chat, it probably won't be picked up for the panelists to review. So if you really do have a question that you want panelists to be able to review, go ahead and choose the Q&A button. And other than that, please enjoy. We'll have a fantastic webinar today. Okay, so what is on today's docket? We'll go through some introductions, introduce our panelists for today, and then we'll have a video from Nicole Masters. Unfortunately, Nicole has been really busy. It's her busy season, and she was not able to make it in today's session, but she did pre-record a video for us to be able to talk about the case study she did, the Cottonwood Ranch case study. So it will run about 30 minutes as far as the video is concerned. And then after that, we're going to get into the April offer, which is going to be about a 5-minute video just talking about the Soil Food Web School and the promotion that we're currently running. And then we'll have 60 minutes for our Q&A. And this again will be for you to be able to ask questions of our panelists. And we expect that the total time today is going to run about 1 hour and 45 minutes. Okay, so let's introduce our panelists. And Elaine, we'll start with you.
Okay. I'm Dr. Elaine Ingham. I'm a soil microbiologist, founder of the Soil Food Web School and Soil Food Web Inc. We do research, so it matches up really well with what we're doing. And really, I'm not really a soil microbiologist anymore. I've added so many other things that we work on in the soil that I guess I'm really like a founder of the soil food web approach.
Great. Thanks, Elaine. Adam.
Well, my formal training was in mycorrhizal ecology, especially the ecology of arbuscular mycorrhizae in agroecosystems. But here at the school, the thing that really, really gets me happy to come to work, at least most days, is the capacity to hone talents for science communication and content creation, especially with many of the wonderful people that I'm sharing this spotlight with today, because each of you has taught me so much. And so that's really, I feel like I just get to be here and learn. And that's why it's so much fun.
Learning is an awesome endeavor. I agree with you. Thanks, Adam. Adrian.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adrian Gottschalk, and I'm coming to you from what's known as Oregon in the USA. And I am my background is in plant biology and chemical ecological interactions of plants with their pollinators and the predators coming to lay their eggs inside of those herbivores that will prevent them from continuing to munch away at the leaves. But since I've come to the Soil Food Web School, I've increasingly become a soil microbiologist. Thank you, Elaine. And from there, have just delighted in having about 60 or so consultant training program students. My students are fantastic, and it's really wonderful to get to see their projects as they work through and they make some great compost and demonstrate that benefit in the plant growth, and then all the way back to showing that disease and pest prevention in some of those plots. So it's been great to work with all of you. Shout out to all my students here, all folks involved.
Thanks, Adrian. All right, Carla.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carla Portugal. Portugal is just a last name. I grew up in Brazil, live in US, so globalization here. My background is in biology, and further I developed in ecological and environmental restoration. And like Adrian said, working with Elaine, all of us are becoming a little bit of soil microbiologists. So once more, thank you, Elaine. And I second Adrian on how, and Adam as well, on how beautiful it is to work here, to have a chance to work many folks one-on-one, and having all of us as a common, as a community growing up and developing tools, critical thinking, and small researchers back in there to continue improving the world of Regen Ag. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. And I'm Brian Vag. I'll be your host for today's webinar. I'm a soil food web consultant, and I actually have two businesses, both in the consulting realm. One, which is just my wife and I for sprouting soil, but we've also combined forces with some of you folks, some other folks that you may know, Keisha and Casey Ernst, to run Catalyst Bioamendments. We've created another consulting company called Soil Matters, and I'm based out here in Oregon. And I also second all of the thoughts that Elaine, Adam, Adrian, and Carla talked about, which was the community that's been built. It's a fantastic collaboration amongst a lot of folks to explore this information, to gain new knowledge. So I'm very, very blessed to be able to be part of this community. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on. And we're going to watch a video from Nicole Masters, and it runs about 30 minutes. And if when you're watching it and you have questions that you definitely want the panelists to be able to answer, please, again, make sure you put it into the Q&A section. All right, please enjoy.
So I'm here today just to talk and kind of drill down on one specific operation, which is Cottonwood Ranch. They are halfway between Wells and Alco, Nevada. They are at the foothills of the Jarbidge Mountains, and in fact, their property goes from 6,500 feet to 10,500 feet, and I have done that on horseback, and it is exhilarating. I did wonder once I got to the top if I could ever get back down. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the property, I recommend you go and have a look at the Shoe Soul Resource Management Group. It's a case study from Alco. I've put that into the chat. An incredible example of collaboration and working to solve pretty major community issues in land that we're seeing increasingly coming under pressure from, variabilities in climate, desertification, degradation, all that. You guys know the story, right? But we would call this a high desert, if you had to describe it. Right, this is some of the family members. I absolutely adore working with these people. It's very interesting at all times. But Jason and Mackenzie Molesby, that's their kids. Also AG and Vicky Smith, fifth generation ranchers now on this particular piece of land. They have an incredible story about regenerating landscapes based on altering timing of grazing and using animals as tools to bring back riparian areas. And so these were some of the images taken in 1974 before a project started looking at, and I wasn't born at this time, so this has nothing to do with me. But looking at what they actually did just through changes in management. So this is same point, same photograph point in terms of allowing these riverways to heal, seeing willow coming back. These areas are still grazed, but being able to control that rest and timing of animal impact has been a game changer. So it was just another photo, 1973 to 2015, 1996, 1998, just through changing what they were doing in terms of grazing, right? And so I began working with this particular operation in 2017. This image here is up in the Jarbidge Mountains, so we're right up incredibly high. That peak up there is at 10,500 feet. These are native shrublands. If we were thinking about, are these fungal bacterial dominated, more fungal dominated soils? All right, so when I started working with them, this is what I found when I arrived. So if you look at the bottom part of the image, they call this the north side, and then if you look to the top of the image, they call that the south side. So the south of this ditch that's running through. So they are not taking water from a bore or an aquifer. This water is all snowmelt that they're slowing down through a series of ditches just to slow that water down to then on this side further irrigate. If you look into the background, you see that the green color is kind of a more olive green, and then you've got these yellow patches, all right? And this is what we're kind of interested in. Now, these two soils have been managed incredibly differently. So the south side has been under a degraded irrigation flood system for 120 years. They were cutting for hay, and they were also at times grazing 270 horses. They were part of the World War I remount program. They were very proud of the horses that they had. They had quarter horses, Percheron, thoroughbreds. I actually have one of the horses from this property, and he is the love of my life. The north side had been under tall sage 30 years ago. They were introduced to Alan Savory's ideas 30 years ago, and they did some of the holistic management training. They also are able to control that flood irrigation better on the north side, right? So when they called me, they were finding that they were basically, the system falling apart. And when I say, like, you've heard of the tale of two cities. This is the tale of two soils. So this is the south side on the left, north side on the right, same day. What we're looking at is one of the most degraded soil systems I've ever seen. If you see those cow pies down there, you could take someone's head off with them, right? They actually had turned off the irrigation on that south side, and this is what happens. Basically, that whole system just falls apart. Now, what was so interesting to me in working on this property is that they had, really been trying with grazing to try and address the issue. That had a lot of different expertise come and have a look, and out of all of that, not a single person dug a hole. Out of the last decade of really not being able to grow any grass on this side, not being able to produce any hay, they weren't able to cut for hay because there's literally nothing growing. All right, so what we're looking at here is we got in the backhoe and we dug a trench. That trench there is 3 feet deep, and there is a literal river of water. Well, in this case, it was more like the water was seeping in. I wouldn't say that water was flowing through, but seeping in. That water is underneath that surface, and all that is growing, the dark green that I showed you, is a plant called poverty grass. It's a type of rush. It's non-mycorrhizal. What we know about rushes and reeds that's really cool and makes them unique is they are able to push the roots down through anaerobic zones and pump their own oxygen around their roots and then reach deep down through the profile so they can access water in anaerobic conditions, right? So we did an infiltration test, and I really recommend that you guys do these if you are. It's very simple. So with this infiltration ring, it took 24 minutes for 1 inch of water to go in, and then after that, no more, like the water would not go in at all. And so we cut that infiltration ring, that core, in half, and if you can take a look, you see that water's just soaked into that top inch, and it's not moving further down the profile. These are what we call the hydrophobic soils. It becomes water repellent when bacteria become dry or incredibly dry, they make a waxy coating. And so we get this waxy coating that sits on top of this profile. We also have the buildup of a thatching material. So we get thatch, which is organic roots, cow manure, any of this material, plant material, litter that's being laid down, that's no longer decomposing. So it's when the buildup becomes higher than the breakdown as we start to see this buildup of thatch. And there's areas that I've seen around the world that are as deep as 7 inches of this thatching material. You will find water repellency sets in. Those roots can't penetrate through that at all. And so there's things that we can do to break up this water repellency, and we can certainly have a chat about that in our conversation. Now, what we're looking at is the north side across the ditch. Hopefully you can see that. Now, this soil, honestly, I had to control myself from not rolling in it. Look at that beautiful, dark, gorgeous brown color, right? You can see the Rastafari and these rhizosheaths around these root systems. What was interesting on the north side is there's not a lot of diversity. Most of this is your creeping Garrison foxtail, but it's palatable. Animals do very well on it. It took us 1 minute to get 2 inches of water to infiltrate. And I want you to think about infiltration, anything over 12.5 minutes for an inch of water, your water cycle has broken down. So the faster that we can get this absorbing, the better. I've seen soils that are able to absorb 18 inches in an hour, right? So when we talk about catastrophic flooding events and weather extremes, most of what we're seeing around the world is due to a breakdown in soil function. What was interesting is less than 5% of these species were unpalatable. And we say less than 5%, we really weren't seeing a lot. There were some dandelions, which is still palatable, right? We did a humus test, so there's laboratories that can actually give you humus tests, and what they found was there's 10 times the amount of humus. What was so fascinating about this is the soil carbon between the north side and the south side was different, but not like hugely different. We're talking about 2% to 2.7% difference across that stream. What was different was this humus. So humus will hold on to 7 times its weight in water, which equals 70 times more water holding capacity. There's something also called biomorphous silica, and this is a byproduct of biological activity. And 1 unit of biomorphous silica can hold on to 700 units of water. It's all about getting microbiology functional and working in terms of converting forms like silica into bioavailable forms. Makes a huge difference. Isn't that beautiful? Just beautiful. So we did some microbial testing in the south and north side, and so you guys will all be very familiar with this, but you see the active fungi were very low. The total fungi, so this is 2017, right? Total fungi actually were in a pretty good range. The active fungi, again, lower. Total bacteria, really high. So there's a lot of bacteria in the system. But what is, I think, the interesting aspect of this is your total fungi to total bacteria at around 0.57, which is the perfect microbial conditions for the signaling of germination of plants like your rushes, like other plants that were in here were things like lupins and like Chenopodium amaranthus family, so red root pigweed, lamb's quarters, so all your non-mycorrhizal plants are doing very, very well in this situation. On the north side, again, the active fungi wasn't that high, but the total fungal numbers were massive. So 1,000 micrograms per gram of fungi in biomass. The active fungi was in a good range. Your total bacteria was about the same from the south to the north. But the interesting piece in this is your total fungi to total bacteria, so 1.75. And Elaine, this is something I'd like to talk about, is like how much fungal biomass are we still seeing as ideal for pastures? Because we're finding that we're pushing more and more active fungi in this and seeing more and more grass growth and palatable grass growth. So looking at our protists, our larger organisms, the flagellates are just like nothing in the south side compared to 16,000 on the north side. And then your amoeba were actually in not bad shape, 29,000, but we had 500,000 amoeba on the north side. All right, so that's our nutrient cycling, our predators, the balance of bacteria and fungi. The ciliates were fine. Your nitrogen potential, they were saying as much as 100 pounds an acre. Now, again, we sampled around where we could find grass. So this was on a transect where there was actually grass. So it's not reflective necessarily of the just being poverty grass, because we wanted to make sure we had grass to compare north to south, right? So the nitrogen potential is 300 plus pounds an acre on the north side. Mycorrhizal fungi, it depends. Like I see labs reporting this in different ways. I'm not up to date with how you guys are reporting this. If you say 0.009 or report that as 9%. So different labs report it differently. And then the mycorrhizal fungi on the north side at 0.14. There was 16% of root-feeding nematodes on the south side, and we can certainly see that by the roots that we were looking at. There was a lot of root-feeding damage, whereas the north side still had some root feeders. We weren't seeing the damage to the roots in that system. This has an impact on the quality of the forage that we're growing. So we took those grasses, we compared, we actually compared fescue to fescue because we had both of those on both sides. And what you can see is the crude protein is half of that. In the south side, the calcium's about 2/3 of that, phosphorus again about half, magnesium just under half, and potassium 1/3. Why that matters is you're just not going to see animal performance on that south side of the field. We're not going to see very good animal reproduction, energy, animal health, and actually if you put animals into those fields, they don't want to be in there. And this is all about our microbial connections in order to lift nitrogen cycling, to mobilize phosphorus, magnesium. Potassium itself is more around having adequate ground cover, so having living, growing plants that are not being extracted in terms of cutting for hay. So it's not actually unusual to see something like that with potassium if you have a long history of using of hay fields. So in 2018, they actually went ahead and they direct drilled straight into that thatch a 7-species mix, so a 7-species cover crop. We put vermicast down that drill. So what we did was we dried it. We dried that vermicast and put it into the basically your fertilizer spreader, so it can go down with the seed. We are getting some phenomenal results with putting vermicast like this into rangeland. Now, dried, you're not going to have a lot of living biology. What we are working with are more the enzymes, the elicitors, the secondary metabolites. So more of my work has been focused on the byproducts of microbiology rather than the active biomass. They also put on a ton of a high calcium rock dust. That calcium is not available. It's literally a rock that they applied. The soil mineral test showed that on the north side, they were around 70 to 80% calcium, and on the south side, they were down to 25% calcium. What we find with some of our biological programs, compost extracts, is we do not get a response when calcium is that low. That microbiology require that calcium. Where has it gone? Well, it's moved down through the profile. It will become available over time, but what I've been finding, and this is something we can talk about, is we're not getting very good responses unless we have adequate calcium. They did a foliar application, so they put on a fish hydrolysate to stimulate the fungi and molasses, stimulate the bacteria with 2 pints of a humic acid. And we put down 5 pounds of a Redmond salt. We could use any kind of sea mineral. It just happens. These guys are in the middle of nowhere, right? It's not very easy to get hold of materials. Oh, what's a 7-species mix? I won't be able to recall off the top of my head. There's a legume in there, there's a grass in there, and there's brassicas. So it was 2017. It's a really good point. I'll make sure that I keep that. But basically, we're just looking for diversity. The plants grew, they ran out of water, and then that was kind of that for the 2018 program. They didn't grow super well, as you can imagine. This thatch is really going to stop water infiltrating very well. By even just putting the drill down, you've kind of opened that soil up enough to be able to break that down. We know that vermicast contains 4 different organisms known to break down these waxy coatings, which is part of the reason as well of using vermicast. I don't imagine these soils have seen worms for a very long time. So we did something that I have only ever recommended once before in my 20-odd years, over 20 years of working with soils. I've never advised people to do this. Their property is as bad as it could get. So do not take away from this that you're going to go and rip up your field. This was a one-off case, and the reason for that was that with all of that thatch material and all of that lack of water movement through the soil, ripping it made sense. So they ripped one way, it lifted like a rug, like this is just a huge carpet layer, then they went back the other way. They didn't have any water that season, so no water was put on. In 2020, they installed pivots. It was incredibly dry. They didn't have any reserve water, no water was applied. 2021, it got worse. 2022, they managed to actually get some water on. They did a trial where they had fertilizer on one side and biologicals in the other pivot. Biologicals, again, we're just talking small amounts of humic acid. Cost them about $20 an acre, whereas the NPK fertilizer cost them $160 an acre. So they really need to know that they're going to be able to grow some hay in order to justify that kind of expenditure. So in this particular operation, they put on 2 gallons an acre or 20 litres a hectare of a fish hydrolysate, and they put on 1 pint of molasses, 1 pint. All right, so just small amounts. They had some real trouble with applications.
What I want you to look at is the difference on the south side between treated and non-treated. So I'm so pleased that they've got control areas where they're not doing any treatments whatsoever. And these two soils are 100 feet apart. If you can look at the bottom on the left-hand side, you can see some of that rock material that was applied. It's going to be there for a couple of 100 years, I think. All right, so you can see that thatch layer. It is literally like a carpet. There's no water infiltration. The only roots getting through is the poverty grass. So on the right-hand side, you can see we have active soil mixing. You can see the iron is now being incorporated. There's a change in color. All of that thatch material has just added a huge wad of carbon foods to feed microbiology. So they don't really need to kind of keep pumping, I think, sort of more complex carbon foods in there, because all of this thatch will be turned into soil if we keep supporting the system. So really, really, if I think about the whole program, so we can say, okay, since 2018, they've started to do some different things. This effect happened in 6 weeks. All right, so the ripping happened in 2020, right? I'll get my memory right. No, 2019. Okay, so that ripped material has been sitting there and laying dormant because there was no water, no seed, nothing was applied until the 2022 season. So that material was ripped, was left there, and now we see the addition of water and putting in a 2-species cover crop. Well, I don't know, 2-species mix, basically. So trying to grow enough forage for animal production. So a triticale and a vetch were put into for animal. But it's this interface between the microbiology and the plants that's really driving this aggregation. Obviously, you don't buy that aggregation by ripping fields, right? This is a process of microbial activity that was seeing root penetration and starting to see that thatch being incorporated and turned into soil. Absolutely phenomenal. Like, you can go to the south side without treatment and just pull that thatch back. There's nothing happening in there whatsoever. All right, so this is standing at pretty much in the same location from 2017 to 2022. All right, so see that there's a bit of Timothy in that and some of the fescue. So that mix that I said, the 7-way mix, had some Timothy and fescue was in that blend. And they really just didn't see that grow at all. I mean, water is a magic ingredient, right? So a rip is, yeah, it's a type of tillage, but it's actually a deep steel tines. Okay, so it's not turned over, it's just opened and violently, right? Not saying you're going to do it. But in situations where you have full water repellency, we could have just put biologicals on the top. It would have been a very slow moving process. I think we could have achieved what these guys really did in 6 weeks, potentially in about 7 years, without that addition of machinery. So if I look at what was so effective at this place, was that they weren't just doing one thing. This is not a one-shot prescription wonder. It was looking at, why have we got that thatching forming? Why have we got water repellency? Well, because the water systems are broken. And now we have a biological issue in terms of water repellency. There's a mineral issue in terms of very, very poor calcium functionality. And as Elaine taught me so brilliantly 20 odd years ago, it's fungi that are making that calcium available. But in a system that's this defunct, we're not seeing active calcium or functional calcium at all. And that has a major impact on microbial activity, as well as livestock performance, right? This is going to get tricky, guys, because we changed labs, which always makes life really challenging. So the mycorrhizal colonization, I put that into percentage colonization. So looking at south side to north side, we can see mycorrhizal colonization has gone from 9%, doesn't look like a 9, does it, to 11% in the south side, but something happened in the north side to 44%, and again the lab changed. So they're both using stains, but I do think that's really important to stay with a laboratory, stay with that methodology. The fungal biomass you can see in the north side has always been high, so over 1,000 micrograms per gram, whereas the south side went from around 300 to above 600 fungal biomass, right? So we're significantly increasing that amount of fungi in the system, right? And then we look at our fungi to bacteria ratios. So when we're around that 0.5, perfect conditions for our more primitive plant species. In the south side to the north side, we're in a situation now where these producers could seed perennial grasses and see them germinate and see them grow well and to be healthy. What I find is producers are trying to put perennial seeds into very bacterial dominated soils, and now we're in trouble, right? Now we're in a situation where we will not see those plants thrive. If they do germinate, you're not going to see them do very well at all. And we often find they won't even germinate. All right, so once we're in a situation like this, this producer can start to seed perennials and see good success with that. So these are, again, the same soils side by side. So the untreated on the left, treated on the right. So you see all of that root mass that's getting down there now. But notice the redox. So the redox in terms of the reduction of iron. So you get all that. These are very high iron soils. You see all of that and that paleness in that soil on the left. It's pretty phenomenal. Right, so this is what the property looks like now. So this is the south side and north side. Horses are on the north. So you can see that there's those burnt out patches are gone, that this ground is now covered in living growing plants. Is it perfect? No. Is it some kind of utopian vision? No. This is something that they will be on a journey with. What I've noticed in some areas is that thatching is starting to return. And this was in areas where they've been using NPK fertilizer. So looking at how do we make sure we continue to address what's causing the problem, and this is an ongoing journey, and I can't speak for these producers. It would have been really cool, actually. I should have thought about inviting them along because this is their story, not mine. Make sense? Okay. Thanks,
Sure.
everyone.
Join the soil revolution today.
There we go. I'm off chat now. All right. So it was a great video with Nicole Masters. And before we get into the promotional webinar series, actually, I just want to hear from the panelists, their thoughts on the Cottonwood Ranch case study that Nicole went through. So who wants to take it away? And panelists, you guys might be on mute.
Anyone else want to talk before me, or I'll just dive into it?
Go ahead, Lane. You can start us off.
Okay, so it's a lot of data that she has here, and it's not the same management practice that's put on each year, so it gets a little hard to take into account all of the variability. But it's such a strong outcome with getting the fungal biomass in there and the mycorrhizal colonization in the root system. I think that would hold up really, really well year after year, going in and applying that kind of getting those organisms up to speed again and working along. So it's a good background to get hold of and say, we're going to continue doing these kinds of management practices to increase fertility, to increase plant production, to get more of the nutrients into those plants. So it's an interesting first start at all of this.
Yeah, it was impressive, the difference in soils between the north and south side. I mean, really, in production too. I mean, you could tell same type of year, same conditions, and one had a massive amount of biomass of plants versus the south side, which really was very denuded. You could tell it was a very degraded system.
Yeah, what got more my attention is about the droughts, right? So even after that, that normally is what scares the most the growers, and the system stay there. So there is, I agree with Elaine and Brian, sorry, that the numbers are impressive, and I want more. I want more details. I want a deep dive on the background, on the backstages to know more about the details.
Yeah, and she also mentioned about not seeing worms, you know, in the south side, which is, yeah, I've dealt with a number of pasture lands that are so degraded like that, yeah, worms are devoid. But after a year of really getting the biology set back in the soil, doing maybe some mechanical means of ripping the soil, breaking up some of the compaction, it's amazing how much, you know, the worms do come back into the equation. And they'll show up. I didn't really have to do anything to get the worms back in there. Granted, we're putting compost products. They're going to have some, I'm sure, eggs of worms, so forth. But the earthworms, the really, you know, big earthworms that do that deep tunneling and so forth, they really migrate back into that system.
One of the interesting points is that in the position where their farm is, the glaciation period took out most of the worms. So, you know, is this an area that hundreds of thousands of years ago had earthworms in it? Along come the glaciers and just ream the soil and left behind no yeah. I love it when the brain goes blank. So the worms, did the worms come back in with the settlers or with some of the treatments that people have been doing? So there's even more that we have to find out. What's the history on this place, and try to understand the important first, second, third, fourth step. And you could see where it would be a while before that's going to be clearly understood.
Sure.
Want to bring Nicole's voice into this. I hear in the back of my mind something she said before, which is that magic comes out of a worm's butt, basically, but she means a diverse microbial community as well, of course. And so tying that into then some of what we then get to talk about further in our Q&A with, how do we work with fungi? How do we work with these organisms that she showed this demonstration? I want to give a pitch for worms, because often with my students, I'll have them even take their finished thermophilic compost and further improve the biodiversity, the quality, the fungal biomass of that material while spending time aging in a worm bin, because then worms get to hang out and share their magic as well. So that's one of the things that, you know, a combination of methods, and that's what I love about thinking about reflections from this video. I always love Nicole's presentations and her voice in this, because she has a yes and philosophy, and takes in her book For the Love of Soil, which I recommend to anyone who's not familiar. She presents these 5 M's: management, microbes, minerals, mindset, and organic matter, which is a delightful way to think about, okay, what's really limiting this system right now? Because it can depend. You can have all the microbes in the world, but if your mindset of working with a living system isn't quite there, then you're not going to treat that like a living system. So I really appreciate and honor her presence in this community.
Agreed. And I also did appreciate that, it's just not one single point of data that she's pulling in. I mean, she looked at the microbial analysis of the system, but then also did water infiltration, dug down in the soil. She's right. There's a lot of people who, maybe looking at managing pasture land and so forth, they'll never take a peek underneath the soil to see what really is going on. Go out there and dig a hole and see, what does the different soil profiles actually look like? What is the compaction of the soil? So I did appreciate that she did pull in a lot of different data sets to be able to gain a better picture of really what's going on into those soils.
Yeah, which thing is most likely the one or the three put together, in a community of some kind, or 4 or 5 or 6 things that go together to turn things around, and especially when it's as rapidly doing as in this example. It was within the first year of getting some rainfall that things could really go to town, and it was very, very rapid once kind of the basic background individual things were met, and then the plants just took off.
Right. Okay, any other takeaways from the video before we move on to our promotion information?
Just,
I guess one thing.
Go ahead.
Got 2 things.
Go ahead, Darby.
You go first, Carla.
It's just to reinforce one topic that Adrian nailed it, is the mindset. And my mind always goes back on one of the chances that I had to see Dr. Elaine presenting to an audience full of growers. And she asked, imagine a tree, imagine your area. And then she gave a couple minutes and asked them, how many of you imagine the root system? Majority of them don't raise the hands. So connect all the dots and all the levels. It's really a game changer. If they don't change the mindset, we can teach and share many tools as we can, but we're not going to go to fruition. So thank you, Adrian.
We must have been on a vibe there, Carla, because I wanted to also jump onto that mindset thing. I had the chance to hear Nicole speak in person when she came through Idaho about a month ago. And I got to ask a question when she finished a talk fairly similar to this, with a lot of case studies about what are the barriers that you see to helping change mindset. And she had this really cool way to do it, to explain this. And then I read a paper recently that said the problem with the term regenerative agriculture, as it's used out there in a very diverse way, is that some people really focus on the process and some on the outcomes. And so the process camp might say, oh, what kind of tillage did Nicole use? Or what specifically did she add with that calcium stuff? Like looking kind of for this perfect recipe type idea there. And the harder way to go about this, but the more correct, more authentic way, in my opinion, is that we say, what are the outcomes that we're looking for? What's the tipping point? When you get AM fungi in the roots from this amount to this amount, how does that take off and improve the soil, or total fungal biomass, or whatever? And then we have to grapple, each land manager, with there are all these different ideas and methodologies and procedures that I have to experiment with. I have to be the investigator to say, what if I combine these 3 or 4 things here, and then a little over here I try these different 3 or 4 things, or I take one thing out and add a new method in here. And that's how they really decide what works on my land in my way. And that's a huge mindset shift that we've talked about before, Brian, that chemical agriculture approach is like, listen to your chemical rep, put the 5 things they're telling you to put on, and then you'll get the yield of XYZ, and you'll have this much profit, and it's all very specific. And biological soil management is just squishier and more gray than that, right? We have to finesse. And I love Nicole's book too, Adrian. I highly recommend it to everybody. And she actually says, when we play with those 5 M's and sort of get the design and the process set up, and have a relationship again with these microorganisms and the plants and the animals on our land, our role eventually is just to tickle that system a little bit, not to come in there and over-engineer it or think here's 5 prescriptions that'll fix everything. So yeah, I love that this is coming out from many of us and that we're having these conversations just this morning. How do we help students understand a compost extract is not about having a recipe, it's about figuring out the principles and then experimenting with that. So here we are. That's what I wanted to say.
Oh, I appreciate what you said hugely. I mean, one of the big headwinds that we have in front of us is that generational thinking of the formulaic aspect about agrochemical systems, right? And it's even worse than that in the sense that the system itself has been designed so that if you want to get crop insurance, then they're going to make sure that you do these things that are going to be really anti-biology in the soil. If you want to get a loan, you're going to have to sign that you're going to do these certain practices. And that's a huge headwind in front of us, but there are investment groups and there are now crop insurances that are looking to make some of those changes. So changes on the wind. So Adrian, I cut you off.
No, thank you. That actually was a perfect segue in introducing that I would also pair Nicole's philosophies with Dee Pursehouse, who I'm going to give a plug for and possibly transition us to the promo. That the soil sponge I was honored to participate in most recently. And, you know, Dee adds another layer of thinking to this that does introduce some of those big systems level, understanding both the biology, the human aspects, the systemic aspects, like you're describing, Brian. And one of the mindset components that I gleaned that really sparked for me from Dee was that her question or her note that she says, I try never to ask a question that I already know the answer to. I love that also to just put out there for myself as a guiding question, a guiding point.
Right.
So never ask a question that you already know the answer to. And then you can learn a lot from people, right?
Yep.
So yeah, Dee, I recommend the soil sponge workshop as well.
Yeah. And for those of you, there's some chat in there. Who's Dee Pursehouse? And how do you spell her last name? P-E-R?
P-E-R-S-H-O-U-S-E. I'll put it in the chat as well.
Chat. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and move on and talk about our April promotion. And we've got quite a few questions that have come into the Q&A, so we'll start to tackle those. So let me go ahead and reshare my screen here. And so this is our April promotion. This is the Springboard Plus offer. And we're significant discounts. In fact, this is going to be, I think the offer ends today, April 26th, and the total savings is 47%. And this is going to be the final time that we're going to offer this this discount. So in order to find out more about this, we're going to run a short video, and then after that, we'll jump into Q&A. So enjoy the video.
When we're talking about the soil, we're talking about the base of everything.
Even our health depends on the health of the soil.
All the sickness and disease leads back to where you live, how you live, and what you eat.
People don't want to use the chemicals, but they don't have any other way.
It's not a desire problem, it's a knowledge problem.
Everyone needs to have some awareness of what our Earth is experiencing right now and how we can make a big change.
I find that this information hasn't been taught to me, and I had to get off my high horse. And even though I have a PhD, I feel like I'm totally undertrained.
I feel like I'm learning more with this program than I have with in-person classes in the past.
I've taken classes on microbiology before, but this course really makes a difference in the way that a story is put together that unveils the relationships between plants and all those beneficial organisms that we just cannot see without a microscope.
If you're looking for something that does a deep dive into soil biology, this is it. It is just an incredible knowledge base and is really relevant to what's going on right now in the world.
Without it, the only way I could have gained this knowledge would have been by dropping my life and going to graduate school. And that just wasn't realistic for me. But Soil Food Web has made it possible for me to build a meaningful career in land restoration.
I was really nervous. I was going to put quite a bit of money down and not get that bang for my buck. But once I actually got into the FC courses, I was incredibly impressed with how professional they are and actually the level of education you receive. This is the career path I've been looking for in the biological community, and I was having trouble finding.
Buen dia.
Selam.
Ciao. Bula.
Wagwan.
Bonjour.
Merhaba. Gamertuba.
Barevsiz.
Kia ora.
It's absolutely amazing to me that there's people with their same approach to life wanting to do better things all over the world. What the course is doing is actually getting those people together.
We don't have enough. In terms of the connection to the network, I have found just an environment of camaraderie and cooperation.
They want you to succeed, and they bend over backwards to give you all of the resources to have you succeed.
At the Soil Food Web School, we train farming professionals and ordinary people who are passionate about the environment. Our students are able to help make a real change to the way that food is grown in their communities and to how the earth is being treated.
Spring is in the air, and there's never been a better time to launch your career in soil regeneration than right now. With the Springboard Plus offer, you can register for the Soil Food Web Foundation courses for just $2,900, and you'll get 2 free bonus courses, saving an incredible $2,600 or 47% off the regular fee price. This is the final time that the Springboard Plus bundle will be made available at this price. Financing options are now available, so you can pay at your own pace with a firm. And remember, the Soil Food Web School offers a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're not completely satisfied, you can get a full refund in the first 30 days, so long as you've watched 32 lectures or less of the foundation courses. Start your new career in soil regeneration today.
All right. Thank you for watching our promotional video, and we hope to see a bunch of new students joining into our Soil Food Web School. And we're now going to move into our Q&A session. So panelists, if you can, go off mute. So the first question is from Rupert, and Rupert asks, most examples of the impact of changes in management we are shown are in arid landscapes. Do these systems have relevance in wet landscapes?
Oh,
Let's
yeah.
see you, panelists.
Yeah, it's the things that are on the systems that right now are on the website, soilfoodweb.com, are a selection across really wet systems to kind of, the grazing western part of the United States, mid-America, and all the way to the coast where it's, you can find both dry as well as wet. East Coast examples, I think one of the examples that's up is the work done at Governor's Island in New York, in the harbor. So across all kinds of different water regimes. So yeah, it's if you've only looked at our website for a short period of time, maybe it was a short period of time that we concentrated just on arid or semi-arid climates, but it works across all the different biomes that you might want to think about, from swamp to the Sonoran Desert, for example. We've done work in the Middle East, where we've been involved in bringing a whole large area around an oasis, an old oasis, rebuilding the water holding part of the system, getting the pond to grow, getting the grasses to grow around the pond, so that there's a water cycle beginning to be reestablished. And you've got to do those sorts of things first, getting the right biology into the soil, growing trees. The first time they've seen trees there in the history of man's memory. So really a cool thing. And we need to get the information that this can be done easily without much money into the system. You can do it. So getting this information out to everybody is really important as well. And that's what our clients are for, is to spread that knowledge all over the world.
I would actually say there are some unique challenges in arid systems. And like, for example, I collaborated with a friend of mine who was an agriculture ecology student in China, and she worked in some of the grasslands there that were very cold and very dry to try to get the plant community, reestablish the diversity in the plant community after overgrazing. And when she visited us and we went to a tall grass prairie in Kansas, she was like, I never even realized grasslands could be like this, you know, just diversity. There, it's like when a lot of our goals, a lot of what we focus on is trying to figure out how to create this very optimized loop between plant and microorganism community, so that the microorganisms are helping the plant get all the nutrients it needs, and the plant is optimizing, is having optimal photosynthetic capacity so that it can create more sugars to share with the microorganisms, right? And there's a whole loop there. It can be much harder to establish if water becomes a limiting factor in the system. So it really says something when these techniques work dramatically in an arid system, because if they work there, they're probably going to work in a mesic system that gets a lot more water all the time.
Yeah, you know, in my mind, what you know, getting the soil food web really established helps us in the resiliency aspect of it, so that when the conditions do go really, really dry, you have more, I don't know, battery, whatever you want to call it, the ability for the soil to be able to hold on to moisture and be able to deal with those really severe climatic conditions. On the same side of the house, when you get too much water in the system, it has the ability to be able to deal with too much water going into a system without causing erosion and things like that. So I think it really does speak to the whole resiliency aspect of, you know, significant climatic kind of issues that we're trying to work on these systems. All right, panelists, anything else you guys want to add?
Yeah, just to stay tuned, because we have students working in different environments, so the case of success will continue to grow in our website. So it's like we said here many times, is about to understand where you are, to adjust what you have to do to reach the desired stages.
Agreed.
And then you're faced with all these really difficult questions like, I want to grow tomatoes. When will I get the proper balances of all this biology so that you can grow tomatoes in the middle of the desert? Well, you're going to change the area around where you're going to put in those tomatoes. And so they're not really growing in the desert anymore, because you've got the water holding capacity back. You've got infiltration instead of erosion. You just all these things that we can do with the biology, getting it right. And then it doesn't cost an arm and a leg. It's, you know, like I think Nicole said it was $20 of inputs in with the biological system, as compared to $160 per acre when you're dealing with the chemicals alone that destroy the biology. So we can fix everything. Well, okay, maybe not everything.
A lot of things.
To your point, Elaine, I think the root of this question, does it work in blank, a wet environment, a dry environment, in a highly acidic soil, in a toxic mine residual soil? Like the question, does it work in? I want to also just bring to the forefront what it is that this method is that we're providing. And that is, you know, we work to make a compost that's rich with additional biodiversity of these microorganisms, many of whom thrive in soil, many of whom provide key growth factors for plants to then recognize and communicate, and many of whom create connections between the plants to share resources. So there's different roles for each of these organisms in that community. And so does it work in? Usually the answer is yes, based on that notion that increasing the biodiversity and the functional diversity of a system is going to work and increase the life of a system wherever it is you're working with them. So my guiding question for will it work is more like, does this increase the amount of life in this system? So taking like a desert system that has an old growth biological soil crust that's 500 years old with white crusties on top, like, turning that into a tomato monoculture is not increasing the amount of life in that system. But an area that has been desertified, that is no longer able to sustain the plant, microbe, human communities that have lived in that area, is a very different desert concept or desertified system. So does it increase life in the system is one of my go-tos for that concept.
Sure. And the whole desertification thing, like the work that John D. Lou's doing, has done. That's very impressive where you're taking large scale, tracts of land and you're reconverting it that was a desertified system and actually trying to reestablish the natural ecosystems that should be prevalent in those areas. Yep.
Yeah, and those areas certainly don't look like desertified anything anymore. It looks like a nice forest area. Where are the orchards? Where are the different kinds of foods? There's the tea over there, and there's the mangoes over there, and it doesn't look like a semi-arid desert anymore. It looks like a highly productive mid-successional stage of the biome that they're in.
Exactly.
Yeah, we can feed the world.
Yeah,
we just have to understand the biology in the soil first.
You bet. Okay, let's move on to the next question. The next question is from Janet. And the question is, when Nicole Masters was discussing the south and north side fungi and bacteria, how was she testing the total fungi and total bacteria ratios?
The total fungi are, what we typically do here at Soil Food Web School. We teach people how to do measure the total fungal biomass, and then you will look at the total bacterial biomass, and then you just take those two numbers and make a ratio out of them. We do have ways to measure active bacteria and active fungi. It's just that we're not seeing that useful data coming out of spending hours on the microscope, having to buy an epifluorescent attachment to your microscope is not cheap. It runs around $2,000 to $3,000. So, are we gaining enough information from doing active fungi? Well, see, and then here's Nicole's information, that you saw today. Yeah, it does tell us something that's important. And then you can do active fungi divided by total fungi, and active bacteria divided by total bacteria. And these are the differences. There are you use a stain to assess that biology in the plant. Measure the length of the plant that actually has arbuscules that are glowing. Or we can use India ink, for example, and then we would count those arbuscules that have a nice rich black color to them. So it's easy to assess the amount of the root system colonized by the fungi. So putting together the soil food web, and Nicole did a great job showing us the kinds of information that we can see, and that we teach people how to do to understand how your ecosystem is working from the tip of your roots of your plants all the way up through the top of the plant above ground.
I'd like to say a word about just soil measurements in general, because it's very confusing. There are all these different labs and universities that say, do this test, do that test, some chemical thing, some biological thing. I did a lot of phospholipid fatty acid analyses in my graduate program, and I know that Nicole uses those in some of hers, which I believe is outsourced to like a USDA, US Department of Agriculture lab. There's problems there. Some of the correlations work okay. Not always the actual data that's reported. It's an estimate, and I could get into all kinds of things about PLFAs. But in general, there's a lot of useful measurements. I think molecular stuff can be useful and all that. It depends on what question we're asking. And here at the Soil Food Web School, we really focus on what I'm starting to articulate more and more is not just regenerative agriculture, but biological soil management, where we always look at our microorganisms as the indicators of our management practices and if they are regenerating soil life and health, or if they are degenerating soil life and health. And so the abundance and diversity of some of these essential key groups of microorganisms that can be observed on a microscope and used to estimate changes. A lot of times we're not talking about a bar here and a bar here. We're talking about that big of a difference, right? You go from almost no fungi because the environment's fairly anaerobic. You fix that and all of a sudden, boom, an explosion of fungal biomass because most fungi are aerobic. And so, yeah, this is the big thing is like people go down all these different tracks. They listen to such and such a professor or such and such an extension agent that says, oh, you gotta spend $200 per sample on PLFAs to really know XYZ. And we're like, okay, what about buying a microscope and learning how to identify these things and being able to see the soil food web? Then you can know, I didn't have amoeba before. I didn't even have one amoeba before, and now I have hundreds of them in my soil sample. Well, because they are part of nutrient cycling, you can then say, okay, could we corroborate that and test? Or what else am I observing? Are my plants producing better? Are they healthier? Right? And then we started to tie these things together. But a lot of people with the different tests and ideas that are out there kind of come to this conclusion like, oh, we don't really understand the functions of microorganisms in these systems. You can't say that increased protozoa leads to X. And I think it's it's like a product of some artificial and some really prideful ways of looking at these things. Whereas we're trying to say, let's look at them directly. Let's see what they're doing. You did something to your land like tillage because you felt you had to. What happened to your protozoa? Let's compare before and after. And that's a huge part of what's going on here. I think Nicole is really into a mixture of methods. And I think lots of what she showed was completely legitimate. But we are sort of specializing in the microscope here at the school. This is one of the things you can learn from us.
Yeah, it's something I deal with all the time when I get new clients. They'll have a litany of history of tests that they've done. And there are so many different things that people will get advised to test on. And it's one of those things you just have to analyze what the test is trying to accomplish, like you were saying before, Adam. What is it trying to tell you? And then from there, you got lots of bits of things telling you, what's going on in the soil. Then you can build a kind of a picture of what's actually happening. And I do agree with Nicole's point, and I think we mentioned it here, is if you pick a lab, try to stay with that lab when you get, even soil chemistry. From soil chemistry company A lab to lab B to lab C, you can get wildly different results depending upon what the methodologies they use to actually come up with the answers or the results for that soil. And it can be very confusing for the end user. Like, all of a sudden my balance of ratios of minerals are way off, or my pH is fluctuating so much, or my soil organic matter. And when you get down to it, you're like, well, every year you chose a different lab and you don't get the consistency there. So. Okay, panelists, anything else you guys want to add? All right, let's move to the next question. And this question's from Max. And Max says, what's the best way to start planting trees/shrubs into a heavy layer of grasses, weeds on a smaller scale without no-till drills, tilling or digging? I have very good black soil on my lot. What do you think about hoop quilter beds and putting wood on the bottom? So I always have something to say about this if people have seen me in previous talks, but anybody else want to jump in before I give my opinion? All right, I'll give my opinion first then. So hugelkultur, we'll just start with that. I think in a lot of systems, I think hugelkultur can be a fantastic tool to increase the organic matter, specifically into helping the fungal communities, because you're putting a lot of fungal foods when using the hugelkultur. Although if you're going to use something like a hugelkultur, and let me just explain what hugelkultur means. It's a cultural practice that I think, different words in different cultures as far as, how this is applied, but you're going to be taking rotting wood and you're going to either bury it in the ground or you're going to create a mound and put soil over the top of it. And the whole idea is you're adding a lot of organic matter, specifically in a woody sense, which is going to be really good fungal foods, into your system. If you're going to be putting hugelkultur in a very dry climate, the recommendation is to put it underground. So you dig trenches, you put your rotted wood into those trenches, and then you put soil on top of that. If you're in a very wet environment, then you're going to want to have the material above ground, and you're going to build these hugelkultur mounds. And you're going to put the wood down and then put soil over the top of that mound of rotted wood, and you plant directly into those mounds. I've used hugelkultur in dry climates with a lot of good success. And so I think it is a fantastic tool to be able to use. And the last thing I would just mention is about, start planting trees and shrubs into heavy layers of grasses or weeds on a smaller scale. Sure. So, if you have heavy layers of grasses or weeds, that's good. It's still good organic matter. I still tend to use all the material. I'll just turn the soil over. In fact, when I do what I call like a lazy garden bed digging method, is I take the topsoil and then pile it up on top. It includes all the different, grasses and materials and so forth that are kind of intermixed into that soil. Now, the one thing I would say though is what you need to have in accompanying that is adding biology into that system so that you can break down all that organic matter that you've now incorporated into that soil profile. And if you don't put the biology in there, it tends to have, I'm not sure if nitrogen rob is the right word, but plants tend to struggle if you're not breaking down that organic matter and actually converting it into nutrients for the plants that are going into it. So combination of using the organic matter, but also making sure you got biology into that system is really, really important.
Yeah, if you're dealing with dirt, which by definition is just the sand silt clay, the kinds of mineral materials that go into the soil, that's not going to give you really good plant growth. You've got to get the biology back into the system, and you have to understand where in succession your plants fall so that you know what fungal to bacterial biomass ratio you need to have, so that you know how many of the predators you've got to have in the soil to eat the bacteria and fungi and release all of those great nutrients that the plant has been telling the bacterium or the fungus to go out and pull out of the sand silt clays, rocks and pebbles, etc., so that when the bacterium and fungi are eaten, that means that nutrients are going to be released in the form that the plants can take up. And that's the reason why you've got to have all of this nutrient cycling going on in the soil, because roots don't make the enzymes to break down organic matter. The nutrients are tied up in that organic matter, and the only way you're going to get them out is to have the bacteria and fungi start decomposing that plant material. The bacteria and fungi have to be eaten by the protozoa, nematodes, etc., so that those nutrients are released in a plant available form. And of course, where do you find this soil food web? It's going to be right up next to the roots of that plant, because the plant is the author of all of all that interaction that I just finished talking about, and probably went so fast you couldn't write it down. So we need to have those, all of the biology and the proper balances, depending on where you want to grow your plant, depending on what stage of succession your plant requires in order to be healthy and happy, in order that that soil will be good and healthy as well. So it's you've got to get that nutrient cycling going. And with respect to the hugelkultur, People always talk about, well, a big piece of wood, the seed-in ratio on woody materials is going to be, especially a big tree like that, it's going to have a fungal carbon to nitrogen ratio of around 100 to 1 to maybe 500 or 600 to 1. And so if you've got to have at least one nitrogen molecule in that woody material, people have always thought that that plant, as it's decomposing, it has to pull nitrogen and phosphorus and sulfur and magnesium and all these other things out of the soil. Whereas if you have the right biology doing the normal nutrient cycling, all that plant material that went down on the surface of the soil last fall, for example, should be completely decomposed by this time of year. And now all of those nutrients have been replenished in your soil. So decomposition of that woody material doesn't steal those nutrients away from your plants. You've got to have the biology in there to do nutrient cycling the way Mother Nature has always done. Think of the sequoia or the redwoods in California, for example, where those plants have grown for the last 2,000 years and putting on new layers of woody material every single year. And there's a massive amount of nutrient tied up in that woody material. So it's not like it doesn't have nutrients, but it's going to get this year's nutrients and the bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes that are cycling nutrients. So don't worry about whether that wood in the ground is has a carbon nitrogen ratio of 100 or 300 or 600. There's plenty of other sources of these nutrients in your soil, mostly sand, silt, and clay, where they get their nutrients from, and they get a bit of other nutrients, and as well as nitrogen, phosphorus, etc., from the soil directly. So stop worrying about that particular item. It's just purely chemical salesman trying to sell you something you don't need.
Agreed. Carla, Adam, Adrian, anything else you guys want to add?
You know,
okay.
I will jump in and say yes, and I do, plants have an amazing ability to make phytochemical products like corn or wheat. Some of the grasses make benzoxazinoids, BXD. Those benzoxazinoids have an iron chelating property. So they can, when they exude those benzoxazinoids as a part of their exudates, those sugars and all those cookies and cakes that feed the bacterial and the protozoan communities, part of that can be these molecules that also have nutrient extraction properties. So I would say that it's a yes and, but the plant is not able to make their full suite of chemistry, their full vigorous phytochemical potential unless they have that full community of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes there supporting them to acquire all of those micro macronutrients. So it's a little bit cyclical, but also that makes sense as life begets life. And I'll also say to this specific question, which was about planting trees and shrubs, I will say that I have never planted a tree or shrub without digging personally. I usually dig a hole. So if someone does have an answer to that, I would love to know it. However, I typically dig a hole and then we'll take that tree or shrub. This is my very unofficial, informal, easy way of doing it on the fly, is take a 5-gallon bucket or 19 liters if you're elsewhere in the world, and take a few handfuls of my compost and just spray that, a technique I learned from you, Brian, of using the water pressure to extract organisms off of those surfaces. There's also official extractors being developed out there that use that method. And so throw a couple handfuls in, make a compost slurry, if you will, or just something that hasn't been filtered out, and then take that root ball, set it into the 5-gallon bucket, and I usually let it sit there for as long as it takes me to dig the hole. And that's a really great way to let that root ball really get, or sometimes longer, saturated in all of those microorganisms before planting. So we know that those root systems are coated in the full biological potential. In addition to all of those hormones and enzymes and nutrients that those organisms are exuding and producing and releasing. So thanks, microbes.
Here. Oh yeah. I say, I think the most impactful way to really jumpstart a system is if you can, in the planting of a plant, you know, a tree or a seed, get it inoculated with the microbes. You really are setting yourself up for success. You can get much bigger gains, I think, once you get those plants fully inoculated as they go in the system versus trying to get them inoculated after they've already been into a system. So, okay. Anything else, panelists? All right.
I think, Adam, do you have your hand up? Nope.
Nope.
Oh,
Nope. Okay.
that's mine. Never mind.
No worries. Okay. Next question. This question is from CMAT. And the question is, can an effective compost tea be brewed from a cold compost process that is sat for 6 months to a year, or must compost from a hot compost process be used, and why?
Well, when you talk about 6 months to a year old compost, as long as you've kept it separated from other sources of biology, it's going to have the same basic biology as you do have in another pile of exactly the same starting materials. And so things just get more stable. They get less and less peaks and valleys and peaks and valleys. They, start to go together to, follow behind each other more clearly as those piles get older. So I don't think we're going to have any really astounding differences between a younger and an older compost. And as long as you're doing the same kinds of extractions with the older as well as compared to the younger pile. The only thing I'd probably really worry about is that too many of your organisms may have gone to sleep in the older compost pile. So you might want to add a little bit of food or a little bit of organic material into the pile, a week or two before you're going to try to extract those organisms to get into the liquid system. And it's a lot easier to apply liquids than it is to apply solids.
And just on the chance that I've interpreted this question a little differently, Elaine, I'm gonna say if you're talking about something more like a static compost, something that didn't go through a thermophilic phase, then the community can be quite different, and it could be harboring pathogens. We focus on 2 different filters to help knock back things that could potentially be problematic from our compost pile, and to create the right conditions for the things that we find benefit plants to thrive, right? And so heat is one of our first filters, where a lot of the things that can cause humans, animals, and plants harm are not very tolerant of getting up between like 131 and 170 degrees. That's 55 and 77 Celsius. And if they're maintained there long enough, at various heat ranges there, they will either go dormant or be killed. And it gives space for the things that can tolerate heat to thrive. And then the second filter is the biological filter. Once we have established that, say 90% of the things we don't want in our crops have been knocked back, then what remains there takes up that space, and it competes with, it inhibits, it consumes those things that could cause harm to our crops or our animals or ourselves. And that's the one that the composting regulations really don't recognize. They're very focused on get it hot enough, turn it 6 times, make sure you've sterilized anything that could be pathogenic. Now, I kind of between what we teach and that, I think is some of what Johnson-Su reactors do, because they go through a heating cycle. Maybe not all material is heated, but enough to create an environmental turning point. And then adding worms or things as it cools down. And then they often say, like, let it set and mature for a year, right? Especially become very fungal dominant. So things are a little different for us. Our maturation phase doesn't necessarily need to go that long because we're using the heat to sort of speed up that process of knock out the things that could potentially be a problem, encourage the things, saprophytic fungi, beneficial bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, and then we start to see like the wisdom of diversity and abundance of these key essential organisms direct that system. We don't need to micromanage them. They work together, and that's how we end up with compost that can be so different from just what you buy at Walmart. Should I have said Walmart? From what you buy at a big box store.
That's right. Ignore the Walmart on the door, but
And if I need to add anything, it's just if you're in doubt about the quality, just go check on the microscope. That's the easy and fast. You can check with the labs and do further investigations, like even a DNA analysis if you want to go that deep. So there is a bunch of different tools that can bring the answer, but the first thing that you need to worry about is what's your goal, what's your main question, what's the material that you have. So then you can decide and planning what your strategies will be.
yeah, and that's why it's important to get somebody to help you on those sorts of things that have gone through all of the if, ands, or buts. But sometimes when you've got this happening, then you've got to pay attention to that over there, or go down there, and then we and you have to recognize what Mother Nature is telling you. So we need you, if you're not going to come and do the FC all by yourself, if you're not going to develop this information, then you need to hire a consultant that will help you with this as well.
And I can tell you firsthand that there's a lot of cool people that we get to work with. So definitely recommend even the opportunity to get to know some of the folks who are coming through our programs as certified lab techs, certified consultants, because I've been honored to work with them.
All right, anything else, panelists, on this question? Okay, let's move on. Next question is, oh, I got to refresh my screen. Sorry, everybody. And there we go. All right, I'm back at it. Okay, so this question is from Mark. We talked a lot about worms, so this question is kind of relative. I have that question about worms as well. Worms in a healthy forest can be devastating to the understory plant life. This has been said to change the makeup of the forest. So kind of a statement, but I think there's a question in here, which is you have to look at the ecosystem, right, that you're working in. So what say you panelists around worms?
I just answered this one the other day. So I believe that Mark may be referring to an invasive Asiatic worm that has caused a lot of problems here in the United States. And it actually has a different life cycle and a different soil ecology than many of our native earthworm species. So this is one of the reasons we really emphasize time and time again with all microorganisms, plants, everything. I'm like, please look at your bioregions. In fact, I'm going to post the bioregion analysis globally that I really believe in. And if you're bringing something that is not from the same bioregion that you are in to your land, be very cautious, please. Be very certain that it has been vetted, researched, carefully done, so that you don't end up with an invasive, problematic species. Because it's just that the function of time and evolution is that some of these ecosystems have created life forms that will disrupt, will reduce biodiversity, will cause other issues. And we see this with Eurasian grasses brought into North America in the tallgrass prairie. They can become, you can see the biodiversity, the species richness of the prairie go from 16 to 2 when these things invade. It causes erosion and other, problematic effects to the soil as well. And so we need to be very cautious. But I think specifically the worms that have been causing problems are sometimes in ecosystems which didn't have worms recently, like Elaine mentioned with the glaciers. They had not been part of that system for thousands of years. And so any worm could be theoretically disruptive. But also these Asiatic invaders, the non-native species that have come over, they eat up the organic matter in a shallower layer, and the way they reproduce rapidly, it can cause huge problems, especially in like the forests of the Northeast they've been studied in.
That's a great reminder, Adam, on the public service announcement to be careful with spreading invasive species. And I saw a question just pop up on the chat about how far can we go to like sample from and increase our biodiversity, or how far can we ship our compost, that sort of thing. And with that, this is a very informal answer, but my gut instinct is if you see a change in the plant community surrounding you, you are likely in a different ecoregion, or there may be a different community there, because there is a different plant community there. So I use the dominant plant species of an area to help me understand that area, but I'm also a very plant-rooted thinker. So there may be people who see a different way of that. I also, this question, have two veins of thought that pop up immediately. And the one which Adam brings up is that when something is present in an ecosystem without their predators, it's the predators that are lacking that causes the problem. And so oftentimes when something shows up where it hasn't been, if they are tricky to eat, like up here in the Pacific Northwest, most homes are, a lot of the folks are seeing these brown marmorated stink bugs everywhere. And that's because the predators that typically would hold those at bay where they come from are not present. And they are chemically stinky, so other things don't want to eat them, so then they can thrive. So things like that is how an invasive species can get out of control. And so that predator-prey dynamic is a very important concept in understanding how the soil food web works as well. The other notion that initially came up with this question is, it seems like the question is seeking a panelist opinion on whether earthworms in general are good or bad, because sometimes they cause problems. And I think I just want to put a note out there that, yes, and it depends. It depends on the situation. It depends on the earthworm. And even the notion of something being good or bad, like that organism is a beautiful organism regardless, but they can cause problems when they don't have the right community balances. So I'm in favor of all organisms.
And one way I look at it too is, if in your bioregion, the ecosystems that you're working in, that in the native areas or really kind of untouched areas, let's say earthworms are prevalent and they're performing a role and there's kind of a thriving ecosystem, but the pasture land you're working with doesn't have that, then I'm always looking to say, I want to use earthworms as an indicator saying I'm bringing back the health and the ecosystem that's kind of supporting that surrounding ecosystem. Then that's what I want to see. If the surrounding area doesn't have earthworms, then I'm not going to be expecting to see earthworms, and if I do see earthworms, I'm like, oh, okay, how did they get into that system? So that's just another way to kind of conceptualize it.
Yeah, because it's not.
Sorry, go ahead.
We're parodying each other. I'll just do real quick and turn it back over to you. Where the reference that was given was the Asian jumping earthworm. Well, one of the first documents that showed that earthworms could be detrimental to forest systems was I'm not going to,
fishers, the anglers.
Yeah.
Is that where you're going? Yeah.
And what's the name of that I'm not going to remember. So
probably the European nightcrawler.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Not the scientific Lumbricus species. And the problem there was that forests require fungal dominated soils in order for the trees to have the right types of nutrients to pull into their bodies. Well, lumbricus makes holes in the ground. They're, little chambers in the ground, and they go up and they grab a piece of organic matter and pull it down into their garden, if you will, and grow a lot of bacteria, because that's what lumbricus eats, is mostly bacteria. And then they'll come back out and grab some more organic material. So building a really strongly bacterial dominated area within that soil. And if you get enough of those earthworms, altering the pH of the soil from a pH of like 6.5 to 5.5, somewhere in that range for most healthy forests are slightly acidic. Whereas when we're looking at soil with aerobic bacteria predominant, our pH is going to be alkaline. And that shift to that alkaline soil killed all the trees. Surprise.
Non-native aspect of it. Yep.
And so all these fisher people that would go out fishing, at the end of the day, when they hadn't used up all of the worms in their containers for the earthworms, they would just pick up the bucket and say, oh, we're doing a good thing, we're going to help this forest out, and released a whole set of new tree killers. And the people just did not understand that's what they were doing.
Because it probably equated, worms, healthy soils. Hey, why not? I'm just going to add it right back to the forest. It should be great.
Yeah, it will be true when you're trying to grow tomatoes, but not so true when we're talking to trees. So back to you, Carla.
I love how everyone here is in sync, because you practically read my mind, so nothing to add there.
Okay, I'll shut up next time.
No. So I think we have time for one more question. So let me go ahead and pop that question in here. And this question is from Josette. And the question is, how can you determine you have fungi or bacteria dominated soils without soil analysis? Visual cues, question mark.
Going to be tough, because you'd have to wait a long time to see that the soil is becoming fungal dominated, because the trees are growing. The shrubs win, and then the deciduous trees win, and then the conifers, the evergreens. And so if you don't have a microscope to look at these things, you've got to wait and monitor with your eyeballs to see what plants are preferentially being selected by the successional system that is occurring.
Yes, Elaine, way to turn to plants for the answer.
Not me.
I will also add that beyond just visual, we have a lot of sensory observational skills. So also the way that it feels, and mostly the way that it smells, because a lot of the metabolism from a compacted soil is going to smell less rich and beautiful. And plus, if you're out there smelling your soil and your compost, and you get that beautiful earthy forest smell, there's also research that stimulates, I think it's serotonin, don't quote me on that, but it could be dopamine, that there's a connection between the smell of humus and our very fundamental happy internal chemicals. So go out, smell some compost.
Yeah, we have a lot of tools, and using like a microscope is a fantastic tool to really kind of get a quantitative aspect about what's happening to your soils. But if you don't have a microscope, then you really need to start honing your other observational skills that Adrian was talking about, right? Your eyes, your nose, your hands from a touch standpoint. It's subjective. It's more qualitative than it is quantitative, but you can still kind of get your observational skills to get you partly there. If all you see is a field full of early successional weedy species, I don't know, my guess is going to be it's probably a highly bacterial soil. If you're in an area that's growing a lot of shrubs and some trees and it's performing fairly well, then it's going to be more fungally dominant. So, and I think it's part of the knowledge base too. You got to get is understanding these plant succession kind of regimes, and then how does the fungal to bacterial ratios kind of fit within those as well, and then that will help you be able to make a little bit more subjective determinations about fungally dominated versus bacterially dominated soils.
And then once you do get that microscope, calibrate your senses to what you're seeing. Keep smelling, keep getting experience with that. I'm going to pass to you, Adam.
I was just going to say, if I can tie into the theme of your yes and with this, you will get different answers from different folks in regenerative agriculture about what assessments are necessary, what observations are going to do it, what's the trick, what's the magic, all of this kind of stuff. And I don't want to put anybody on blast, so I hesitate to mention a name, but I will mention Ray Archuleta, who's someone that's been very inspirational to me over the last 5-6 years. We had him on a webinar, maybe it was like a year ago, Elaine. Yeah. And I could tell that there was like this disconnect, or like we were a little baffled by some of what he was saying, and he was a little baffled by some of what we were saying, because he goes, I go into these annual cropping systems that leave the ground fallow for a long time. I put in multi-species annual cover crops and my soil turns around. So that's the answer, multi-species cover crops. And we're like, what about the microorganisms? And we've done this with John Kemp. Like, I really appreciate him too. But there's this tension there in terms of practice that comes in. And it's not that I think any of them is particularly wrong. I mean, I've shared this so many times, people are sick of hearing it. I just put the microorganisms at the keystone of the arch. Every other methodology, all these other approaches, Korean natural farming, all of it, I'll embrace all of it. I'll yes and all of it. I want to know how these different practices are affecting the microorganisms. Well, in our Soil Regen Summit, we had Dr. David Johnson of Johnson Sioux. And BEAM agriculture is his big thing. What does that stand for? BEAM. I can't remember. We'll
I can't remember either.
Biologically enhanced
agricultural management.
That's it. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So he showed data where they did the multi-species cover cropping alone, and they did the Johnson Sioux, which is a similar, it's going to be very, very good compost alone. And then when they put them together, boom, that was the synergy. And that's what I really have tried to, I tried to bring this in last week with my vision of the future of agriculture and fungi as well, is finding those places where the synergy fits together. And it's going to be land management practice change. Nicole talked a lot about land management practice change in her talk. And it's going to be inoculating these organisms as well. When we see that they're missing, right? We have to have all the pieces. It's the same thing in the human gut. If you're missing something critical in there, you need to put it back, and you need to change your diet to support that population being robust, right? So this is, I think, where this is where a lot of this comes together about how we observe and measure soil, and where the foundations of a sustainable system actually are. It's going to be this magic that happens when we take broken holobionts and we mend the context so that they can do what they all do together so well, which is pump sunlight as liquid gold into soil to create life in the soil, diverse and abundant life. It's beautiful when it works like that.
Agreed. Anything else anybody want to add to that? That was, I think, a pretty good close. All right. So before we finish the webinar, let's just go ahead and talk about what's upcoming. So in our April webinar series, we have webinar 4 still coming up, which is Fungal Farming Experts Meet the Fungi and Fungals. Again, that's Saturday, April 29th at 11 a.m. Pacific time frame. And this is where you get to hear from folks like myself who are actually out there working as consultants in the field and working with clients. And this is a good opportunity too for those of you that are thinking about becoming consultants, or you're farming and you want to hire a consultant to kind of understand what it is that we do in kind of a day in the life of. So it should be a really, really good discussion, and I hope to see all of you guys there. Okay, with that being said, let's go ahead and close today's webinar. First, I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing all this wonderful information and having a great Q&A session. And I also like to thank our support staff behind the scenes. Again, without you guys' work putting together these the April series or the series of webinars that we do once per quarter, without you guys there, we really wouldn't be able to get this off. So thank you for the support that we have. And also I'd like to thank our audience. Without you guys showing interest and really wanting to come and learn and ask great questions of us, we wouldn't have these webinars. So thank you very much for showing up. Okay, with that, we can go ahead and close.
And thank you, Brian.
You're welcome.
Yep, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone.
You had to put up with all of us.
Oh, not at all.
Don't forget to click that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell to stay updated with all our new videos.